Last segment, we talked about the Iran-Iraq War and the significance of that war as signaling the end of the Cold War. So I want to resume our discussion from that point onward. With the threat of Iran being able to defeat Saddam gone, Saddam, if you recall, I mentioned, was a rank opportunist. So now he is beginning to rebuild his country after the war with Iran. And one of the things he is really looking for is to once again try to accomplish his ambition and become the leader of the Arab nationalist movement. In the meantime, he is having some issues with his two supporters, main supporters or backers during the Iran-Iraq War, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. In order to build his economy, Saddam wants them to forgive the loans that they had made to him during the war, and especially in terms of sales of sales of oil, whose proceeds they gave to Saddam so he could continue his war. And both refused to forgive his loans. Therefore, Saddam is now getting to be very upset with Kuwait, and lo and behold, his anger ends up playing out. In August 2nd, 1990, he invades Kuwait. And what happens then is that we get the first Persian Gulf War, which lasts briefly from August. It starts in the invasion of Kuwait in August 2nd, 1990, and then with our forces going in January of 1991, and very rapidly ending the occupation of Kuwait by Iraqi forces. This is known as Operation Desert Storm. So the invasion of Kuwait finally disabuses everyone regarding Saddam's motivation. A lot of people thought that he invaded Iran purely because he was worried about Islamic resurgence and Iran's intention to export the revolution to Iraq and elsewhere. But having invaded a fellow Arab neighbor who had helped him during the Iran-Iraq War, everybody is disabused of Iraqi's intentions or Saddam's intention. Now, one thing that is important about that war is that close to 98% of Iraq's military equipment and weapons were destroyed during that war. And I mention that because you will see that by the time 2003, when we go invade Iraq for the second time, this fact was almost lost on everyone, realizing that Iraq was really defanged during the first Gulf War. Now, that war is also important for one other reason, and that is it really it straddles the Cold War and the post-Cold War era. If you look at the Cold War in terms of the official, more or less official ending of it, it started in the August of 1990, but by the time the war gets started, the Cold War is over, and so one can arguably say it was the first post-Cold War conflict that the world had. There's a lot of details in terms of inter-Arab politics that one can get into as to the motivation for Saddam invading the Iraq and the circumstances leading to that invasion. But again, that will take us too far afield. So therefore, most of those will be covered in your reading. What I want to talk about is to return back to the domestic politics of Iraq. From 1991 to 2001, for that 10-year period, we have a real, we have a policy that can only be described as simultaneously trying to contain both Iran and Iraq. That policy is known as the dual containment. Dual containment, the dual refers obviously to the two countries, Iran and Iraq. But what defies logic is this: Iran and Iraq are both bitter enemies. They had an 8-year war with each other, and even the peace that they have is nothing but a cold peace. And yet we treated them as if they were allies almost. So the logic of, it's really logic defying policy, this dual containment. Now, on the surface, therefore, things seems to have going pretty well, to be going pretty well for the U.S. There is not much happening in that period. We are having really crippling sanctions placed on Iraq because even though our policy is dual containment, under Clinton administration, our real policy is regime change. We're trying to overthrow Saddam, and we want to do it by covert means. At least 3 covert operations by CIA is conducted during this period to attempting to overthrow Saddam, but none of them succeed. And so, nevertheless, we feel as if the policy is kind of working. Iran is being contained and Iraq is being contained. So things are going pretty much our way. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, we get this shock on September 11, 2001. So that shock really dramatically affected our understanding of our own policy. We had not expected this to be happening, and the way it happened was so dramatic that it took us some time to be able to even recover. Now, one of the most important question that we began to ask, and I began my manuscript addressing that question, was this: why do they hate us? And that they referred to mostly Middle Eastern Muslims who we saw as perpetrating the September 11 attack. And in my manuscript, the section, the beginning section that has been assigned, I try to address this very issue by looking at the 2 presidents raising exact question. One at the time of, during the early Cold War by President Eisenhower, and then later on at the end of the Cold War, well into the end of the Cold War, President George W. Bush. So I'm not going to repeat what I discussed in my manuscript, but initially though, as far as the Bush administration is concerned, our response was simply that they hate us because of our values. President Bush gave a speech to that effect, saying that they just hate democracy. But that was really a disingenuous response. Our own surveys and polls showed us that Arabs and the Middle Easterners in general actually like our values. They value democracy and freedom. It's not that they hate it. What they did not like was not our values, but our policies in the region. So the real cause of their hatred was our policy. And even though the Bush administration initially resisted such an explanation, at the end they knew they had to accept it and they did, except that the provenance of that hatred goes back not to our values, but to the kind of policy that we pursued. So it's because of our policy. But the question now is, which part? In other words, pursuit of which one of our interests led to this. So we should be able to answer that question by tracing the impact of 9/11 tragedy on what I have called the post-Cold War Holy Trinity. Remember, the Holy Trinity are those three interests of us, and from the previous lecture, I pointed out how it had evolved at the end of the after the Cold War, and I specifically said, for me, the end of the Cold War began with the end of the Iran-Iraq War back in 1988, rather than the collapse of former Soviet Union. So, in order to be able to trace the impact of 9/11 on the post-Cold War interest of ours as captured by or encapsulated by Holy Trinity, let us briefly review what the Holy Trinity was. Remember, in the post-Cold War, the Soviet containment was out now, and it was replaced by ensuring the free flow of oil. The second one was the security of the state of Israel. And the third was the protection for the conservative Arab regimes against internal and external threats who have been our allies for these years. And earlier on during the Cold War, they were the means to an end. So the question for us is, which part of these three objectives is more expendable? Because if we can answer that question, then you can understand what policy we're going to follow. And the answer to that question is, when you think about it, the oil is obviously not going to be the issue, because most Middle East, they own their own oil. Early on, that was a major issue early on during the Cold War when we talked about nationalization in Iran. But by now, the oil is for exporting, and so that's not the issue. And the other interest is ensuring the security of Israel. That is going to be obviously an issue, or protecting the conservative Arab regime. Obviously, the people of the Middle East hated these monarchies. They were corrupt and they were dictatorial. So the question becomes, which one can we give up? And to answer this, we have to kind of be able to decide which one of them is expendable. And I think you won't have any difficulty to come up with an answer to that question. Giving up on the conservative Arab regime domestically is more palatable than changing our policy toward Israel. So the remaining choices were really between giving up the support for State of Israel or for conservative Arab regimes. Blaming the decades of one-sided support for Israel as the main cause of 9/11 was simply out of the question. Politically, it would have been almost suicidal for any American administration to view this the way I've mentioned it. In other words, to say that the cause was our support for the State of Israel, although Al-Qaeda over and over kept telling us and reminding us that was the main cause. So the only remaining option was to pin the blame entirely on our third interest, our support for those who we love to call moderate, responsible leaders, but now we are now beginning to see them as a liability. And the moment you see these allies of yours as a liability, you are no longer thinking of them as moderate responsible, but now you're beginning to see them as corrupt and autocratic. So we were now willing to revisit one part of the reality that was shaping our foreign policy. Our conservative, autocratic, dictatorial allies were for the most part to be blamed. And that's what we told ourselves caused them, the people in the Middle East, especially the Arab people, to hate us. So we said basically as far as the cause is concerned, making a judgment about the cause of terrorism, United States was not being true to its own democratic values. By supporting these dictatorial, corrupt regime, we were, in a sense, the Bush administration said, betraying our own values. Therefore, we concluded that the root cause of 9/11 must have been our support for these autocratic Arab regimes. So now we know the cause, so we have to find a remedy. And the remedy, of course, is to change our policy from supporting these people to hopefully changing the regime in those countries that are ruled by them.